For the past week or so, the world has been on tenterhooks as the US and Iran approach Trump's latest deadline, with the president threatening a dramatic escalation unless Iran were to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The rhetoric employed by the Trump administration leading up to the deadline was pretty extreme, and it sounded quite a lot like they were threatening to commit war crimes. Both Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and Trump threatened to bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages on multiple occasions. And on Sunday, Trump posted an expletive-laden tirade on Truth Social, urging Iran to open the strait and signed off, "Praise be to Allah," before warning on Tuesday that, quote, "a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran didn't make a deal." Until really the last minute, a deal didn't seem forthcoming. Iran insisted it had no interest in negotiations, and reports emerged on Tuesday that the Iranian government had cut off all communications with the US. Israel and the US carried out what looked like preparatory strikes, including a number on Iran's Karg island. Encouraged by the government, Iranian civilians upped the ante by forming human chains around potential targets, including power plants and bridges. However, much to the relief of the global economy, barely a couple of hours before the deadline was due to expire, Pakistan's Prime Minister announced via a post on X, which, judging by its draft history, was literally sent to him by the Trump administration, that the two sides had agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. In his accompanying post on Truth Social, Trump claimed that, as part of the ceasefire, Iran had agreed to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and that, somewhat surprisingly, the US had apparently accepted Iran's new 10-point peace proposal as, quote, a workable basis on which to negotiate. So, in this video, we're going to have a look at this 10-point proposal, and whether it could actually happen. Trump was the world's most influential person on our recent ranking. So in the latest edition of our magazine Too Long, we explain how he retained his top place position, and why that strong result might actually be based on increasingly shaky foundations, as he grapples with unpopularity and divisions within his base. That's just one of 72 pages in the magazine, because as always there's more to Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, before we get into that proposal, we should say that there is some discrepancy between the American and Iranian descriptions of the current ceasefire. For starters, it's not clear whether the ceasefire covers Israel's ongoing war in Lebanon. The post by Pakistan's Prime Minister seems to imply that it does, but Israel has since claimed that, while they, quote, support Trump's decision to suspend strikes against Iran, this ceasefire doesn't include Lebanon, and the IDF continued its operations against Hezbollah on Wednesday morning. Furthermore, it's not clear that Iran has actually agreed to properly reopen the strait. Trump's Truth Social post suggests the ceasefire is contingent on its complete reopening, but the Iranian statement says Iran has only agreed to safe passage via coordination with the Iranian armed forces. This is almost the exact same language the Iranian Foreign Ministry used in a statement last month, when it announced that vessels from non-hostile states like China, Russia, India, Iraq and Pakistan would be allowed to pass through the strait, quote, in coordination with the Iranian authorities. In that case, this didn't mean a total reopening of the strait at all. Rather, in coordination with the Iranian authorities meant that these ships had to pass through Iran's heavily militarized Qashem and Larak islands, with many of them paying a multi-million-dollar toll for passage. If Iran is implying something similar this time around, then there's no way that traffic through the strait is returning to pre-war levels, given that, well, you just can't fit that many ships through the narrow passage between Qashem and Larak, especially if they're all being inspected and tolled by Iran. Even if Iran agrees to a more complete reopening of the strait, normal traffic probably won't resume until ships and insurance companies feel confident that the war isn't going to restart anytime soon. Anyway, if the two sides can iron out these wrinkles, and the ceasefire sticks, which, by the way, is something we spend quite a bit of time discussing on today's episode of our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard, the basis for further negotiations is apparently going to be the 10-point proposal that Iran apparently sent to the US on Monday. So, what's actually in it? Well, there are currently a number of different versions floating around, and neither side has officially published the full 10 points, so we're not 100% sure. But a recent statement by Iran's Supreme National Security Council claims that the plan would require the US to accept the following. First, a total cessation of hostilities against the so-called Axis of Resistance, including not just Iran, but also Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. Second, some sort of guarantee against future aggression. This is a key demand for Iran, who are understandably worried that the US and Israel might just use the negotiations as a pretext to prepare for another attack, as they have done in the past. Nonetheless, unless China wants to get very involved, it's hard to imagine a security guarantee scary enough to actually deter further US aggression. Third, the total withdrawal of all US troops in the region. For context, the US currently has 8 permanent military bases spread across the Middle East, and it's near abroad, with a further 11 temporary ones, which host tens of thousands of troops. Fourth, the removal of all sanctions on the Iranian economy, the withdrawal of all UN Security Council resolutions and UN Board of Governors resolutions against Iran, and the unfreezing of all Iranian assets and funds held abroad. Fifth, Iran's continued control over the Strait of Hormuz. The statement makes no explicit reference to Iran's ability to toll ships passing through the strait, but given that's what's currently happening, and the statement's use of the word continued, it feels very much implied. Sixth, and finally, Iran wants all these changes codified in a UN Security Council resolution. Additionally, the original statement makes reference to acceptance of enrichment in regards to the Iranian nuclear program, but according to The Guardian, that phrase was missing in English versions shared by Iranian diplomats to journalists. The original statement also suggests that Iran is demanding reparations for damages incurred during the war, but other reports have suggested that, instead, Iran would be willing to use its toll revenues from the Strait of Hormuz, which would apparently be split 50-50 with Oman, to fund its reconstruction instead. Whatever the specifics, you get the idea. Iran's 10-point plan is pretty maximalist, and would require the US to back down on a number of its prior red lines, including Iran's continued control over the strait, a total withdrawal of sanctions, and, perhaps most notably, the withdrawal of US troops from the region. If, as Trump suggested in his Truth Social post, this plan does form the basis of some future agreement, it would be hard to see how this wouldn't represent a strategic defeat for the US, although that doesn't necessarily mean Trump won't be able to sell it to his base. As we mentioned earlier, the latest edition of our magazine, Too Long, is out now. And if you subscribe using code TLDR26, then you'll get £4 off your first copy, bringing the price as low as £3.99, our lowest ever price, as well as getting you 20% off every future issue as long as you stay subscribed. Speaking of future editions, let me show you for the very first time this summer's edition of the magazine, currently entitled Trump's Rules of War. This map on the cover shows a dot for each region struck by Trump since returning to office last year, and there's always the chance it'll look even redder before we go to print. Inside this issue, we'll be running through each of these different conflicts, airstrikes, and incursions.
A little excursion to take care of nuclear weaponry?
Sorry, excursions. So if you want to track that timeline with us and better understand what's motivating Trump here, then you'll want a copy of this summer's Too Long, where we'll also be discussing a whole load of other topics. Luckily, if you subscribe today, you'll not only get the spring issue immediately, but you'll also be signed up for this summer too, ensuring this issue lands through your letterbox or in your inbox as soon as possible.